Recently, an epic video with Steven Seagal explaining Aikido to martial artist Jesse came out. But the video left many people asking if what he demonstrated is really effective. As a former Aikido instructor, now turned to combat sports practitioner, I received a lot of messages asking me to take a close look at what was shown in the video. And so I decided to do it by first breaking down the techniques that Steven Seagal demonstrated and then taking a critical look at the theory he presented. Here's what I discovered.
Technique that comes from sword.
So that is a famous Steven Seagal move. Many people recognize it from him using it in his movies. And while there is a similar technique in Aikido known as Ryuminage, most Aikido schools never teach it in such a direct way. And personally, I think this direct approach could be a legit applicable technique.
On the street, people normally will not punch you like this, they'll punch you like this.
So this I can really appreciate, because what Steven Seagal is referring to are Aikido strikes. In an Aikido, you usually punch either like this or like this. You very rarely punch the face. It's always a straight punch, usually toward the chest. And he's right. Very rarely people will attack like that. Usually it's haymakers. And so the fact that he has developed certain movements to deal with the haymaker already shows that potentially his approach to Aikido is more realistic than the general approach to Aikido.
As it comes, you'll notice something very different.
That movement itself, I'm not sure if that would be my approach to defending against a haymaker. I think the idea is to not only block it, but also to be able to follow it afterwards to do an Aikido technique, because you need to be in touch with most Aikido techniques. My question though is if a haymaker is really fast, you really get into the spot at the right time. If it's not easier to just step back and come back with a counter. But in the end, I think this move should just be pressure tested and seeing if it could be done against a person who's really trying to get you and you're really trying to go for the move.
When your punch comes, it would be like this.
The whole lifting your arm up, controlling the center line as they call it in Aikido, I am somewhat skeptical about that. There's just a question of why would you do such a big movement, expose yourself, when there's so much easier and more efficient solutions. And nobody's gonna keep their arms sticking out there. A person who knows how to strike, they're gonna jab, and then immediately they're gonna jab again. And if you're deflecting that arm, you're getting a second jab. Instead, why not parry? Why not slip? Those movements are much more economic and efficient.
Kicking. But these guys said, wow, I know the guys that you talked that front kick to. No one could see it.
So Steven Seagal is referring to the infamous front kick that many people know that he taught to Anderson Silva. I have some things to say about that, but let's first check what he has to show.
If you're here and I wind up and do a big kick, you'll see it. What I try to do is a kick where you don't see it. Just don't lift your knee. Put your foot straight there. Yeah.
The concept itself is legit, of disguising your moves, to not telegraph them and to get the person without him expecting it. Not lifting your knee and going straight into it. I'm not entirely sure if there's no danger to collide if the other person is standing in a fighting stance or constantly moving, but the concept itself to hide your kick without telegraphing it, that is a legit one.
From here, I have this. This is snap off.
And I can't move.
And then from here, I can also walk him around. Come down to here like this.
So all the techniques which Steven Seagal is doing on Jesse, to a degree they are legit techniques and they work in that specific scenario. When a sensei is demonstrating the moves on a non-resisting attacker. I've done them, they were done to me. They are very powerful under those conditions. As long as you're not resisting, you really are standing on your toes and you just can't move. But the real problem of applying these techniques in a real fight is how to get there. Those positions are really difficult to get to when a person is trying to grab you, strike you, tackle you. And usually in Aikido, dealing with those real attacks with resistance is not trained. And so there's no legit, well-developed approach of getting into that position. But who knows, maybe Steven Seagal is going to show a better approach than what I've been used to seeing in Aikido.
When I punch, I'm not doing this. Feel the difference?
Yeah.
He's doing this. I'm doing this.
Whoa! You can't tell when you're looking. It's way different when you feel it.
So Oliver is right, it's hard to say what he's doing differently here, but it does seem different. Let's take a closer look. It just seems he's able to transfer a lot of kinetic energy all the way from the foot to the punch. Where in the first one, he's kind of just using his shoulder, which is not really a proper way to punch, and boxers wouldn't do that. But you can see that he's really using his hips and his entire body and using his fist as kind of a whiplash to make the second strike more powerful. So yeah, it seems like it's a thing.
The only takedowns that we will do that we think are nicer stuff.
You know, that type of takedown, again, it really works really well with people who are just standing there. They're not resisting. They don't see it coming. And even if they're resisting, but they're just standing there, yeah, those takedowns work pretty well. Would they work against someone who's in a fighting stance and they're fighting you? That same takedown? I have much more doubts about that. But again, that's where pressure testing would come in, which unfortunately we're still not seeing here.
For example, when you come to grab my leg, I'll hit you in the eyes like this on the way down. I'll hit you here. By the time you're down here, look what's exposed.
Yeah.
It's your brainstem.
So that is an interesting approach of using the gouging of the eyes or hitting some spots as a defense against takedowns. Now my question is, are you really going to get those eyes? If the person is really moving fast, are you really going to hit the spot? Because, you know, the eyes, they're only that big and they're a moving target. Are you really going to hit that trigger point, which apparently severs the brainstems? Those are the questions I'm asking. But if somebody's going for a takedown and you're stepping back, you're elbowing, you're landing a knee, or you get a good strike of attacking the tackler, I think there could be merit to that too.
This is my fighting pose. And from here, I might do this. I've already killed you, but I have this now.
So that fighting stance may look suspicious to many people, and I understand why. But actually there is merit to that stance. A similar approach I learned is from a self-defense expert known as Tony Blauer, the founder of Spear, where he would advise also to keep your hands either crossed here, or you're de-escalating with your hands in front of yourself, or you have your hands here at the face, because you don't want to transmit that you're ready for action. You don't want to give an announcement to the attacker that now I'm going to fight and you will have a chance to prepare. You also don't want to escalate the situation by showing your fighting stance. But if you're here, your hands are ready to protect yourself at any time, your hands are ready to strike, and the other person doesn't see it coming. What matters is that you're not keeping your hands behind you, you don't have them crossed where you can't uncross quickly, or you don't have them in your pockets.
Planting on the foot, grabbing the throat, striking with this.
So that's an interesting approach, to step on the foot and to kind of control the opponent that way, also holding the throat. I'm not sure how much control you get on placing the foot on the foot, because the foot is so mobile, and there's a question if you're really going to be able to hold the person down there. But I think there could be some utility to it. And it's cool to see that there's an attempt to control the person before striking, so it would be harder to avoid and get away from the strike.
From here,
Yeah.
I have you here,
Yeah.
here, here.
It's an interesting point to also use this part of the hand to strike. Where again, I can see the logic behind it, because in a self-defense situation, there is danger in striking with a fist, because the fist is more fragile than you think, and it's easy to hit tough objects such as the forehead. So you can easily break your hand, especially if it's not conditioned. So instead, to use a different part of the hand, there could be again merit to it.
We do this a lot. And I'm coming in here and in here. Once in a while we'll come in here. Because I train it every day. This, you know, is very dangerous. And you can imagine if I did that in your throat.
Yeah, I can see the lethality behind it, attacking the throat. And as Steven Seagal points out, if you have conditioned your hands and your fingers, who knows, maybe they could be a legit weapon. My question is still whether maybe it's not just more smart to strike, but I would be interested to hear the explanation of why use straight fingers instead of a fist or just a palm.
Here. We will sever the brainstem.
I'm not entirely sure about severing the brainstem. Maybe I just don't know something.
This in sword is called ukinagashi. So when the sword comes down, you see the sword? This is a sword.
That logic about the sword, it's a popular one in Aikido to say that the movements come from using a sword. Now, whether it is true or whether it's practical, I cannot really say. But the concept of taking sword moves and translating them to hand-to-hand moves, it is part of the Aikido philosophy. I then broke down the martial arts theory that Steven Seagal presented.
If you have to fight somebody to end it immediately.
I agree. That's what most of the self-defense instructors say. You want to end the fight as quick as possible, because the longer it goes, the more unpredictable stuff can happen, and that can go against your advantage.
When people say all fights end up on the ground, they are incorrect. 90% of the fights that I know end standing up with one person going horizontal. We don't want to dive down on the ground. And just as much time as those guys spend trying to dive for your legs and get you, we spend just as much time cutting your head off or knocking you out or ripping your eyes out or ripping your throat out or severing your brainstem when you go down there, because your head and your neck will be vulnerable.
So I know what Steven Seagal is referring to exactly. It's a famous phrase that apparently the Gracies made famous, which is that 90% of the fights end up on the ground. So it's not all, but 90, it's close to all. Personally, I'm also skeptical of that phrase and that idea. I think many fights do end up on the ground, but to just expect, 90% of the fights go on the ground, so that's why I should train 90% only on the ground, I think that's not fair, because as one of the self-defense experts that I met, he said, well, almost 100% of the fights start up standing. Now, to not train any ground moves at all, I think that's a flaw. And that's a common flaw in Aikido, my former martial art, that you're not training on the ground because you're not going to go to the ground. But it's not your choice. The fight can still end up going to the ground. So I think as long as the idea is that you're not preparing the ground and you're also preparing for stand-up, I think that's fine. But to ignore the ground completely, I think that could be a flawed approach.
In our style, we are completely offensive, completely aggressive. We don't wait and watch and try to get them tired. We don't do any of that.
So that is a very interesting moment, because it's a very unique approach from Steven Seagal for Aikido, which he is an instructor of. Since pretty much in all Aikido, you're always the defender. You're taught to never attack. You're taught not to be aggressive. And here's Steven Seagal, a legit master of Aikido. He's teaching Aikido in an aggressive way, which is very different from the regular way Aikido is taught. But there is that fighting style. In fighting, usually those are called the pressure fighters. The people who are always constantly putting pressure on you. And if you don't know how to deal with it, they are super tough opponents. They can really get into your head. You don't have time to respond. You get lost, confused, and they often win, especially at the beginning of their career.
I would show some of the technique in the movies, but most of the real, what we call uraden, we kept secret.
I'm not a big fan of the term secret techniques, because usually I think moves which work, they have been working for thousands of years, all the way from Roman times, if not even earlier. Most of the stuff has been figured out already and demonstrated somewhere. Usually the secret moves in martial arts are more like a cool lore to attract interested students than it is legit movements which are somehow secret. But I can also cut some slack here and to admit that in the past, and this is probably what Steven Seagal is talking about, where YouTube was not existing, where phones with cameras did not exist, and the internet did not exist, people had much less access to information, and so yeah, I guess some movements could have been considered secret and kept from the general public. By the way, if you went for a journey of learning Aikido and evolving into a combat sports martial artist, then I want to quickly introduce you to the latest martial arts journey merch, which is this cool t-shirt showing that evolution of fighting all the way from monkeys to traditional martial arts and eventually to combat sports and freeing yourself through them. So if you want a cool t-shirt representing that, check out the website martialartsjourney.com and you're gonna find all the information there.
They'll go, well, you know, this stuff that you really do, it's so dangerous. How many times can you rip someone's throat out in a practice? We don't rip out your throat. We don't rip out your eyes. Just as in karate, we don't blow out your skull. You stop before.
So I can see both pros and cons here. First of all, it's true that you cannot really train all the techniques like eye gouging or kicking in the groin, which are effective techniques, but you can't train them full force with someone and you can't gouge eyes every time. At the same time, I think what Steven Seagal is referring to, you can't practice the movement itself. No, you're doing it at least until that certain moment. You get it into your psyche and physical movement that it is possible, that it's an option. But then the problem that you're not fully training it is really tough as well, because you're not having a resisting partner, you're not having a full-on experience, and then there is a chance that if somebody will attack you, you will have been used to doing this stuff without a resisting partner, and those movements simply can just not come up because your system is used to a different environment when you're doing it, or it freaks out and it doesn't know what to do when the action goes really live. So hopefully what is being taught is not only those secret moves where you're not having any real resistance or pressure, and those are just additions to a well-developed system of training with pressure testing.
If you want to end it immediately, you have to attack first.
So especially when talking about real-life encounters, again, I am more or less on Steven Seagal's side here. A famous self-defense expert, Peter Constantine, talked to me about the exact same thing. There's a phrase that whoever strikes first wins, and in self-defense, usually that's true because you're not prepared. You don't know what's coming. A sucker punch, a surprise attack can come out anytime. You can be distracted by talking, you can be distracted by hidden angles. A friend of the attacker can attack you from behind. So often the advice in self-defense is actually to strike first. Cobra Kai, anyone? And while it has to be calculated to some degree, striking first in self-defense usually is a smart way to go.
How about in the eyes of the law?
Well, that's a good question from Jesse, but there is an answer to that. I'm just curious now what Steven Seagal is going to answer.
I don't care about the law. If I have to fight, I don't care about the law. I care about ending it quick.
So that's an abrupt way of looking at it, and I think more thought could be given to that. For example, there's the consideration of striking with an open hand, which can still cause a lot of damage and even knock people out, but on camera and on the eyes of witnesses, it doesn't look like you're the aggressor if you're slapping versus if you're striking. But usually the recommendation from self-defense experts tend to be that yes, you have to sometimes take that risk, and even as Tony Blauer says, it's better to be judged by 12 than to be carried out by 8. So sometimes you have to take that risk and protect your life and think about the consequences later, whether just focusing just on the consequences and potentially getting yourself killed.
You never let him fight his style.
That brings up the famous Bruce Lee quote, where don't try to outbox a boxer and don't try to out-grapple a grappler, which is a smart way to go.
You always would break his rhythm and his timing so that he can't fight his style.
So again, that's a legit theory, a legit approach. There is that question of, okay, we want to see that in practice. I want to see that against a sparring partner that Steven Seagal spars against. They're both trying to get each other, and he demonstrates that versus demonstrating against people who are just lounging at him. But despite still not getting that part, the theory itself, it's legit. So gotta say, overall, there were a lot of good things here. A lot of the stuff that Steven Seagal said was legit. It makes a lot of sense in self-defense. Now, are all the moves legit? Maybe. But the bigger question is, are they the most optimal moves? Aren't there better options developed by other fighting styles? That's a bigger question for me. And the biggest question is pressure testing. I would want to see these moves in a sparring situation, against someone who's really trying to get you and someone who's fighting back. Now, of course, not all of these moves could be practiced, and maybe not all of these moves are designed against a squared up fight, but modifications can be made. The attacker can put on armor. You can choose roles. You can remove the most dangerous movements and still practice most of them. And that's what I would like to see, making sure that these moves work a lot of times against someone who's really going for you. But again, theoretically, there was a lot of good stuff. Now, if you want to see a cool video with me and Jesse, where we are comparing old school karate with modern karate, click on this video right here. And then as always, I wish you to own your journey.